Bob Marley was halfway through Exodus when he noticed something impossible. 50 people in the front rows weren't moving, not dancing, not swaying, not even nodding their heads. They just stood there, tears streaming down their faces, completely still. At first, Bob thought maybe they were overwhelmed. That happened sometimes. His music had a way of reaching places inside people they didn't know existed. But this was different. This was strange. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shape the legends we know today. June 18th, 1979. Lyceum Theatre, London. The venue was packed with 3,000 people. Every seat filled, bodies pressed together in the aisles, the air thick with anticipation and the sweet smell of something Bob chose not to think about. This was a special night. The Lyceum had history. The Beatles played here, the Rolling Stones, and tonight, Bob Marley and the Wailers were about to create a moment that would change how the world understood music forever. But Bob didn't know that yet. The band had opened with positive vibration. The crowd erupted, exactly as expected. Bodies moving, hands in the air, voices joining Bob's in perfect harmony. This was what reggae did. It moved you. Not just emotionally, physically. The rhythm got into your bones, into your blood, and made you part of something bigger than yourself. By the second song, Concrete Jungle, the entire venue was a living, breathing organism. 3,000 people moving as one, except for those 50 people in the front rows. Bob's guitarist, Junior Marvin, noticed it too. He leaned toward Bob between verses, eyebrows raised, gesturing subtly toward the front. Bob nodded. He saw them. Who were they? They looked like everyone else. Different ages, different backgrounds, some young, some older, but they all shared one thing. Complete stillness and tears, so many tears. Bob had seen people cry at his concerts before. No Woman, No Cry did that to people. Redemption song, too. Music touched the soul, and sometimes the soul responded with tears. But this was different. These people were crying from the very first note, before he'd even sung a word that could touch their hearts. And they weren't just crying. They were holding each other. One older man had his hand on a young woman's shoulder. She had her arm around a teenage boy. He was holding hands with an elderly woman beside him. They were connected, forming a chain, a human circuit of some kind. But here's the strangest part. While 2,250 people were dancing, screaming, singing along, those 50 people were completely, utterly silent. By the third song, Them Belly Full, Bob couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was happening in his concert that he didn't understand. And Bob Marley, despite being one of the most famous musicians in the world, despite playing to hundreds of thousands of people, was still the kind of man who needed to understand. He walked to the edge of the stage during the instrumental break. The Wailers kept playing, but Bob's attention was locked on the front rows. He pointed at one of the men, a tall Jamaican man, probably in his 40s, and gestured, "What's going on?" The man just smiled, a heartbreaking, beautiful smile, and kept crying. Bob felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't normal concert behavior. This was something else, something deeper. Then he saw it. One of the women in the group was moving her hands, not clapping, not waving, moving them in patterns, shapes, language, sign language. Bob stopped singing. Just stopped, mid-verse. The Wailers, confused, started to slow down. The crowd's energy faltered. 3,000 people suddenly uncertain about what was happening. Bob held up his hand. The universal signal. Wait. Hold on. Bob said into the microphone, his voice cutting through the confusion. "Hold on, everyone. Something's happening here." The music stopped completely. The venue went silent. You could hear people breathing, shuffling their feet. The confused murmur of 3,000 people trying to understand why Bob Marley had stopped his own concert. Bob pointed to the 50 people in the front. "You, all of you. What's happening? Why aren't you dancing? Why are you crying?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, one woman started walking toward the stage. Security moved to stop her, but Bob waved them off. "Let her come." She was maybe 30 years old, with kind eyes that were red from crying. She reached the stage and pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket. Her hands were shaking as she held it up to Bob. Bob knelt down, took the paper, and read it. His face changed. Everyone in the venue watched as Bob Marley's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something that looked like devastation. His eyes filled with tears. He read the note again, then looked at the woman, then at the 50 people in the front rows, then back at the note. "Oh my God," Bob whispered into the microphone, not realizing he was speaking out loud. "Oh my God." The venue was dead silent. What was on that paper? What could make Bob Marley, the man who had survived assassination attempts, who had brought peace to warring political factions, who had become the voice of the oppressed? What could make that man break down on stage? Bob stood up slowly. He wiped his eyes. Then he turned to the crowd and held up the note. "This is what it says," Bob read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "Dear Mr. Marley, we are 50 deaf people. All of us. We cannot hear your music. We cannot hear your voice. We cannot hear the guitars, the drums, the bass. But we are here because we feel you. We feel the vibrations through the floor, through the air, through our bodies. We feel your music in ways that people who can hear might never understand. We are crying because this is the most beautiful thing we have ever experienced. For the first time in our lives, we understand what music really is. It's not just sound, it's energy, it's love, it's life itself. Thank you for teaching us that we are not broken. We are just different, and different is beautiful." The venue exploded, not with cheers, but with sobs. 3,000 people crying together. Security guards wiping their eyes. Even the band members were crying. But Bob Marley was standing completely still, just like those 50 people had been standing all along. He understood now. They weren't unmoved by his music. They were moved so deeply that their bodies couldn't respond in the way everyone else's did. They couldn't dance because they were too busy feeling. They couldn't sing because they were too overwhelmed by the vibrations entering their bodies. Bob did something then that no one expected. He stepped off the stage, not backstage, but down into the audience. Security tried to follow him, but he waved them back. This moment wasn't for cameras or protection. This moment was sacred. Bob walked directly to the 50 deaf people in the front rows. They watched him approach, tears still streaming down their faces. The rest of the venue watched in silence, not wanting to break whatever was happening. Bob stood in front of the older Jamaican man he'd noticed earlier, without saying a word, because what was the point of words? Bob took the man's hand and placed it on his chest, right over his heart. Then Bob started humming. Not singing, humming. Creating vibrations with his voice that the man could feel through his hand, through Bob's chest, directly into his own body. The man's eyes widened. His mouth opened in wonder. He felt Bob Marley's voice not through his ears, but through touch, through connection, through love. One by one, Bob went to each of the 50 people. Each time he placed their hands on his chest, his throat, his mouth as he hummed, creating vibrations they could feel. Some laughed, some cried harder, Some just stood there in awe, experiencing music in a way they'd never imagined possible. The entire venue watched this happen. 3,000 people witnessing Bob Marley give a private concert to 50 people who couldn't hear a single note. When Bob had connected with all 50 people, he climbed back on stage. He picked up his guitar and turned to the band. "We're going to do something different now," Bob said. "We're going to play this concert for them." He pointed to the 50 deaf people. "Everything we do from this moment on, we do for them. More bass, more drums, more vibration. I want them to feel every note in their bones." The Wailers nodded. Aston family man Barrett turned his bass up until the venue itself seemed to pulse. Carlton Barrett hit his drums harder than he had all night. The rhythm section became a physical force, and Bob Marley sang One Love. But this time he sang it differently. He sang it with his whole body, moving in ways that created visual rhythm for people who couldn't hear. He conducted the crowd, getting them to stomp their feet in unison, creating vibrations through the floor. 3,000 people stomping together. The entire building shaking. The 50 deaf people in the front rows feeling every single beat through their bodies, through the floor, through the air itself. They started dancing. Finally, they danced. Not like everyone else. They danced to the vibrations, to the visual rhythm of Bob's body, to the physical pulse of 3,000 people moving together. It was the most beautiful dancing anyone in that venue had ever seen. By the time Bob sang Redemption Song, there wasn't a dry eye in the building. The song took on new meaning. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Freedom wasn't just political. Freedom was understanding that there were infinite ways to experience beauty. Infinite ways to connect. Infinite ways to hear music, even when you couldn't hear at all. The concert ended 2 hours later. But what happened afterward is what made this story legendary. Bob invited all 50 deaf people backstage. He spent 3 hours with them, learning about their lives, their experiences, their relationship with music. He learned that many of them had never been to a concert before, because they assumed it would be pointless. "How did you know to come tonight?" Bob asked through an interpreter. The older Jamaican man, whose name was Marcus, explained through sign language. "My daughter. She can hear. She loves your music. She told me, 'Dad, you have to feel Bob Marley. Not hear him. Feel him.' So we organized. 50 of us. We bought front row tickets. We came to feel you." Bob was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "From now on, every concert I do, I want a section reserved for deaf people. Front row, free tickets, and I want the bass turned up so high they can feel it in their souls." Marcus started crying again. "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do," Bob said. "Because tonight you taught me something I should have always known. Music isn't just for ears. Music is for everyone." That promise changed concert history. From that night forward, Bob Marley's concerts always had a designated section for deaf audiences. The bass was always turned up. The rhythm section was always emphasized. And Bob always made sure to create visual rhythm with his body so that people who couldn't hear could still experience the music fully. Other artists heard about what Bob did. Within a year, major concerts across the world started including accommodations for deaf audiences. Today, it's standard practice. Sign language interpreters at concerts, designated vibration sections, visual rhythm elements built into stage design, all because of what happened at the Lyceum Theater on June 18, 1979. But here's the part of the story that most people don't know. The part that Marcus didn't tell Bob that night. The part he only revealed years later, after Bob had passed away. Marcus's daughter, the one who loved Bob Marley's music, the one who convinced her deaf father to go to the concert. She had died 3 months before that show. Cancer. She was only 22 years old. On her deathbed, she made Marcus promise, "Dad, go to Bob Marley's concert. Feel his music for me, and tell him that his music was the only thing that made me not afraid to die. Marcus went to that concert to fulfill his daughter's dying wish. He brought 49 other deaf people with him because he didn't want to feel alone. He didn't plan to give Bob that note. He didn't plan for any of what happened. But when Bob stopped the concert, when Bob looked directly at him with those questioning eyes, Marcus felt his daughter's presence. He felt her pushing him forward. And somehow, the woman with the note knew exactly what to write. After Bob died in 1981, Marcus visited Bob's grave in Jamaica. He brought 50 white roses, one for each person who was in those front rows that night. He placed them on the grave and signed, "Thank you for teaching my daughter that she was never broken. And thank you for teaching me that love is louder than any sound." Today, Marcus is 93 years old. He still goes to concerts. He still feels music through vibrations. And he still tells the story of the night Bob Marley stopped everything to understand why 50 people were crying. Bob didn't see deaf people that night, Marcus says through his interpreter. He saw people, just people, and that's what made him a legend. Not his music, his humanity. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that there are infinite ways to experience beauty. Have you ever experienced music in an unexpected way? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget that notification bell for more untold stories about the moments when music reminds us what it means to be human. Because in the end, that's what Bob Marley understood that night at the Lyceum Theater. Music isn't something you hear, it's something you feel. And feeling has no limitations, no boundaries, no disabilities. It just is. And so was Bob Marley. One love, one heart, one humanity.